before you both get started, I just wanted to remind everyone about the chat and the Q&A function in the webinar today. Definitely encourage questions and comments. The Q&A is a place to put a question you would definitely like to get answered. Chat for more of that discussion piece. And I did want to note that the webinar is being recorded if you want to refer back to it later. So on that note, I will hand it back over to Stephen and Cary.
Good afternoon, viewers. I am Stephen Jusu. I am a doctoral candidate nearing completion of my dissertation. I will be presenting on how to create responsive education culture in both traditional and virtual classrooms.
Hi, thank you for attending today. Thanks, Stephen. I am Dr. Cary Gillenwater, professor for NCU School of Education, and I am Stephen's co-presenter and his dissertation chair. Glad to be here.
So the quote on the screen is by Dr. Jeff Duncan Andrade. This quote, Dr. Andrade is the co-founder of Teaching Excellence Network and a professor at San Francisco State University. He was guest speaker at the Teach for America event in 2016. In his address, he spoke about academic rigors and culturally responsive pedagogy, saying, teachers cannot be academically rigorous if they are not culturally responsive. That means that both makes you fulfill the true goal of educating your learners. So how do we unpack cultural responsiveness in his view? We look back at culture and its components, including race as a component of culture, gender, sexual identity, class, language, the food people eat, style, music, and even zip code are components of culture. So we must be attentive to include all these components of culture in providing education for every kid. We educate, and when we create our instructions and or lesson plans, let's think about the purpose, the relevance, and sustainability of what we know is proven to be culturally responsive in our classrooms, and not solely relying on textbooks. So as we design curriculums and lesson notes or plans, we must seek the relevance and purpose to the culture we are talking to. Next.
First, we'd like to share some background information about culturally responsive education. And so we have some learning objectives here as well. Learning objective 1, the audience will be able to identify and make a mix of tools that will encourage a responsive education culture. Learning objective 2, the audience will better understand the role culture plays in students' learning. And learning objective 3, the audience will learn how to maintain a responsive educational culture both in traditional classrooms and virtually.
So for the next 3 slides, I will be sharing some background information on the topic of discussion. But before we can proceed, the next discussion on our main topic, let's take some time to talk about Gloria Lavsin-Billing, Geneva Gay, and Django Paris, whose seminal work introduced us to what culturally responsive teaching, culturally sustaining pedagogy, and culturally relevant pedagogy means. So 2 decades ago, Gloria Lavsin-Billing introduced the term culturally relevant pedagogy that describes how teachers must engage with their learners whose experiences in culture and traditionally excluded from mainstream settings. Billing proposed 3 goals on which these teaching practices were grounded. So the first one was teaching must yield academic success. The second was teaching must help students develop positive ethnic and cultural identities while simultaneously helping them achieve academically. And the third one was teaching must support students' ability to recognize, understand, and critique current and social inequities. By centering these goals in their practice, culturally relevant practitioners can empower students not only intellectually, but also socially, emotionally, and politically. Three components are embedded in a culturally responsive, relevant pedagogy. One, student learning. The student intellectual growth and moral development, but also their ability to problem solve and reason. Number two, cultural competence. Skills that support students to affirm and appreciate their culture of origin while developing fluency in at least one other culture. And the third one, critical consciousness, the ability to identify, analyze, and solve real-world problems, especially those that result in societal inequities. Next. So the next slide is continuing on the background to culturally responsive teaching. Now, building on the work of Lapsing and Billing and Geneva Gay developed a framework whose stronger focus on teaching strategies and practices. That is the doing of teaching. Coined the term culturally responsive teaching to define an approach that emphasizes using cultural knowledge, prior experiences, frame of reference, and performance style of ethnicity, diverse students to make learning encounters more relevant to the effective for them. Gay, in 2018, called on culturally responsive practitioners to make positive change on multiple levels, including instructional techniques, instructional materials, student-teacher relationship, classroom climate, and self-awareness to improve learning for students. Gay also argued that an asset-based viewer of students is fundamental to ensuring a higher degree of success from students of various cultures or cultural groups. Like Lapsing, Gay also placed a strong emphasis on providing opportunities for students to think critically about inequities in their own and/or peers' experiences. But if we beg the questions, how to teach in culturally responsive way? First, you have to know your students. That is, you commit to knowing your student well, knowing them academically, socially, and emotionally. And the second thing you got to do is, regardless of subject discipline, build on student experiences. Give them an opportunity to give their account or experiences on subject of discussion. Engage your students to help them make connections to their curriculum, their cultural experiences, their community, national and global identities. The third is create a classroom learning community. Encourage students to care for one another and be responsible for each another, both in and outside of classroom. Create a consistent routine that helps students feel valued and safe and accountable to one another through the cultivation of a welcoming classroom environment. The fourth one is hold academic standards and expectations for all your students. Encourage all students in the classroom to reach those standards by designing lessons with the most undeserved student in mind. The fifth is understand your own cultural identity and its consequences. Examine your own cultural behavior patterns, especially when it comes to classroom management and discipline, and be honest, caring, and humane with your students. Next. Our next slide is still continuing on the background information, but this time culturally sustaining pedagogy. So more recently, continuing Lapsing Billings and Gay's work, Django Paris in 2014 expanded on the work of culturally relevant pedagogy to develop a vision for culturally sustaining pedagogy, an approach that considers the many ways learners identify, learners' identity and culture evolves. So Paris and Allen, 2014, posited that culturally sustaining educators not only draw on, but also sustain students' culture, both static culture, e.g. the heritage ways and home language, and evolving culture. In other words, culturally sustaining educators help students develop a positive cultural identity while teaching math, reading, problem solving, and civics. Paris also offers a loving curriculum, a critique of CRT, arguing that relevance in the curriculum cannot alone ensure students will be prepared to live in an increasingly diverse global world. They maintain that culturally sustaining practice has its explicit goal supporting multilingualism and multiculturalism in practice and perspective for students and teachers. This is an important goal at a time when schools are increasingly racially segregated and students are grappling with racially motivated bullying. By situating equity within the teaching standards, we can improve culturally sustaining pedagogy. Different states have developed their own standards and criteria to enforce teaching with equity in mind. We are using the Iowa state teaching standards and criteria. These standards and criteria include, number one, enhancing academic performance. With this standard and criteria in mind, teachers accept and demonstrate responsibility for creating a classroom culture that supports the learning of every student. Two, competence in content knowledge. Understanding and use key concepts, underlining themes, relationship, and different perspectives related to the content area. Three, planning and preparation. Use students' developmental needs, backgrounds, and interests in planning for instructions. The fourth is meeting multiple learning needs, aligning classroom instructions with local standards and district curriculum. Demonstrate flexibility and responsiveness in adjusting instructions to meet student needs. Engage students in varied experiences and meet diverse needs and promote social, emotional, and academic growth. Connect student prior knowledge, life experiences, and interests in the instructional process. Fifth is classroom management. Create a learning community that encourages positive social interactions, active engagement, and self-regulation for every student. Create a safe and purposeful learning environment. Six, professional growth. Apply research knowledge and skills from professional development opportunities to improve practice. Seven, professional responsibilities. Demonstrate an understanding of and respect for all learners and staff. Collaborate with students, families, and communities to enhance student learning. Slide 7, responsive education culture. So collectively, the three, culturally responsive, relevant pedagogy, culturally sustaining pedagogy, and culturally responsive teaching, these three Collectively, scholars think it promoted CRT, culturally responsive teaching, as alternative to popular deficit orientation teaching method, which position the language, culture, and identities of students as a barrier to learning. While these pedagogies are not identical, they share a common goal: defy the deficit model and ensure students see themselves and their communities reflected and valued in content taught in schools.
So we've shared some background information that was hopefully helpful and kind of front loading. Now we're going to move into what we're going to call information sharing, which is focused on how to create a responsive education culture in both traditional and virtual classrooms. So there's a few parts to this. We're going to discuss responsive education culture, the need for a responsive education culture, cultivating a culturally responsive leadership, developing tools necessary to build a responsive educational culture, and maintaining a responsive educational culture virtually.
So responsive education culture, what to consider when you talk about that? As we all probably know by now, culture denotes the way of doing and communicating within a certain context. A culture is typically considered as regarding a group of people, particularly an ethnic group. However, culture also entails the context of those people. Our classrooms today present multiple cultures, making it diverse. The Center for Association Leadership, ASAE, defines diversity as something encompassing a broader array of differences than demographics. It also includes age, physical abilities, skill sets, socioeconomic status, family status, lifestyle, preferences, language, religious beliefs, and spiritual values. The context we will explore is that of education. In the classrooms and schools specifically, responsive education culture is an approach that promotes student engagement, learning, and achievement by focusing on student knowledge, cultural background, and experiences in the classroom. Students that experience a responsive education culture engage with academic content in a way that are personally meaningful, purposeful, diversely oriented, and that connects across lines of differences. Now, let's look at the different elements. We have divided these elements into under 5 categories, which includes symbols, language, norms, values, and artifacts. So under values, we consider people's beliefs, principles, and important aspect of lifestyle, type of marriages they come from, monogamous, polygamous, same-sex marriages. These are factors that we probably would need to consider. What people eat also, tools people use to eat, settings in which people eat. These are factors we can consider under values. Artifacts, the type of governments and leaders, sport teams, games, TV, popular music, trading partners, import-export workforce, main jobs, language of the area or dialect. On the symbols, religious symbols, religion of the area, prayer and worship, holiday time items, holidays, clothing, greetings, typical rituals and activities. On the norms, how to prepare food, what people do in their free time, how the system works. As teachers, these are things that we probably have to look at when we prepare students in a culturally responsive culture. The need for responsive education culture, I think, is greatly needed in our society. For the first time in the United States history, a majority of K-12 public school pupils are students of color. Upon graduation, these students will be part of the most diverse workforce in United States history. So 96% of major employers say it is important that employees be comfortable working with colleagues, customers, and/or clients from diverse cultural backgrounds. These statistics make it imperative that our nation's schools not only welcome diversity in classroom, but also teach students how to navigate an increasingly racial, ethnically, and socio-economically diverse society. Furthermore, educational institutions are becoming more and more diverse. Education communities, inclusive of schools, colleges, and universities, are tasked with creating an environment for all students to achieve. However, research have found that Indigenous people, people of color, and LGBTQ students, plus students, disproportionately experience teachers' biases, punitive discipline, and narrow decontextualized curriculum. In a contextualized curriculum, teachers use authentic materials, activities, interests, issues, and need for learners' life to develop classroom instructions. For example, a teacher can help students learn language skills by teaching the skills using authentic context in which students must use these skills in real world. So responsive education increases student confidence, interest, motivation, and academic success. It also promotes racial and ethnic identities, self-esteem, socioeconomic well-being, and the ability to overcome discrimination. In all of this, leadership matters. So the next slide, we'll look at cultivating a culturally responsive leadership. Leadership and authority spearheads the need for a culturally responsive education to thrive in schools by providing the necessary tools, including curriculum that supports the teacher's effort. To build a culturally responsive, proficient school system, stewardship by culturally responsive leadership, school leaders must build the framework through culturally responsive pedagogy, beginning with the process of critical self-reflection. People tend to make assumptions that influence their way of engaging, but when they reflect critically on the impact and origin of those assumptions, how they think, assume, feel, can change to fit the context on the realistic way of the interpreting views that support student learning. Numerous studies have also shown that critical self-reflection can help students manage anxiety and stress, develop realistic expectations concerning their new academic demands or changes in their social life, increase self-awareness, and renew passion and purpose. Leadership must also reflect upon the current needs of the school, including reflecting upon the demographics of their school or institution. In addition to leadership requirement, we must also acquire the tools needed to build responsive education culture. Next slide, we talk about developing tools that are necessary to build a responsive education culture. So teachers use different tools to take different approaches in applying these tools within their classrooms. Some of the tools are as simple as committing to knowing their students, building on student experiences, creating a classroom learning community, setting high academic standards and expectations, and the teacher themselves understanding their own cultural identities, and so on. There are There also exist many other tools for building a responsive education culture. For example, developing a culturally relevant pedagogy by integrating multicultural literature into the learning plan or the lesson plan, and also using culturally responsive teaching to promote discussions that activate student experiences. Additionally, introducing culturally sustaining pedagogy by allowing, inviting, and encouraging students to not only use their cultural practices from home in school, but also to maintain them. Lastly, engaging with supporting institutions, including government institutions, to institute policy changes at the national level that drives equity within the educational system, inclusive of providing funding for cultural programs, initiatives, and supports that target each student have equal access to high quality education. Our next slide will introduce us to how we can maintain a responsive education culture virtually. On the slide, we have 5 points. Point number 1 is activating student prior knowledge. Students enter the classroom with diverse experiences, and teachers must encourage students to draw on these prior knowledge to contribute to classroom discussions. The second one is making learning contextual. Tie lessons from the curriculum to the learner's social communities to make it more contextualized and relevant. Encourage students to leverage their cultural capital. Teachers must activate student cultural experiences. Remember to draw examples from the minority student experiences. Reconsidering your classroom. Take note of the diversity in your virtual classroom. Give examples that apply to those who do not identify with the majority group. Use media authored by other races that cuts across your classroom diversity. The last one is build a relationship. Teachers must work to build relationship with their students to ensure they feel respected, valued, and see for who they are.
So now we're going to move into the discussion session. So hopefully, I believe you'll be able to respond at least through the chat. But we have some discussion prompts here. So as you can see, there's 3. How can educators build relationships with students in a virtual environment? If you were given an opportunity to address a class of diverse students, how would you make your talk inclusive? And how can a student's prior knowledge be activated in a classroom, considering specific subjects such as math or history? Sorry. So here, go ahead.
So question number 1, how can educators build relationship with students in a virtual environment? The quote is by Dr. Mucha Ramachandra at Leeds Bucket University. So,
one of the biggest misconceptions that beginning online instructors have is that if I can teach in the classroom, I can teach online. Teaching in the classroom and online require 2 totally different approaches to activity and task design for accomplishing your learning objectives for the particular course. Any responses to so we can have a discussion on this prompt? Oh, I see. Okay, I can see.
Okay. All right, so.
We've got a comment here. Hi from Mississippi. I teach online and it is a different experience. I can't see the students. I only see how the students respond in discussion board posts. That's a good point. And then another comment, I agree that online and live are not the same. That's true. I mean, I guess I can share as an online instructor in courses and as a dissertation chair. One of the things I have learned along the way in my few years here at NCU is that you've got to remember the old idea of, tone is hard to understand, particularly when it's asynchronous. So like in a text you may get on a phone, right? It's very difficult to know what tone to read that in. If you're in a bad mood, you may read that in a bad mood, right? As a bad tone. So as an instructor and as a chair in particular who gives a lot of feedback, I have to be careful with how my tone may come across and my feedback on the work. Maybe Stephen can say like, sometimes, but so that's, but I find that, also trying to just reach out and have connections that aren't just through our system of the asynchronous feedback and just through NCU1, phone, Zoom, office hours, all kinds of various things. So that's one of my ideas.
Someone has their hand raised, so I'm going to go ahead.
Oh, great. Okay.
Let them talk so they can share their thoughts. Jennifer.
So let's see, did that work?
Perfect, thank you.
Okay. I just did a presentation on trauma-informed practices in virtual settings, which are actually have some similarities because, connection becomes a primary, the point is that it's harder to connect online. So it's basically all your practices for connecting and relationship building, you kind of have to turn up the volume. And I agree that tone and words matter. And so does a real understanding or attempt, genuine attempt to understand like the unique challenges that these learners are facing, because of the type of instruction online, or maybe because of the context in which they're having to learn, which you generally have no idea where they are or what they're experiencing. And they need to feel valued and respected. And some of that means that you have to convince them it's okay to ask, for clarification, or ask for help, or ask questions. A lot of people who have been marginalized by society or, traumatized, they really don't believe it's okay to ask for help, because a lot of them don't trust that, they have a lot of different beliefs about it. So sometimes you have to be very repetitive and sincere in saying, please check with me. You matter to me. And then the last thing is really, it helps if your routine is consistent and predictable and whatnot. But then it also helps to acknowledge the uniqueness of the situation by offering flexibility in some areas as well, so they feel valued and like they're being understood, and not being, accused of making excuses or something. So those are just some ideas.
Thank you. Very, very good point.
Thank you.
There was a comment in the chat as well about approaching them in a caring way, respond to them. Oh, okay. Sorry. I think I missed one here. Let's see, the community. Well, maybe this one's ahead of it. I'm having, there we go. Ask students if they have any items. I'll get to the other comment in a minute. Ask students if they have any items that highlight their culture. Students usually like to use props when sharing. They help with talking points. So that's interesting. Any thoughts around that idea of, like when we meet face to face in a Zoom meeting or something, I often tend to ask, like, can you tell me a little bit about yourself? Where are you from? Tell me about your life. But the idea of, show me something that you're interested in. I don't know. What do you think? I always kind of wondered if that would be invasive, but like I like comic books a lot, but I don't usually drag them out. So that's an interesting idea, though. Any thoughts on it?
I have a thought on that, Cary, that I'll share. Because actually, I have an adult that I do some coaching with who likes to do that practice. She likes to have the opportunity to share something, and she wants to know. She'll be looking behind me in my environment and wants to know something about me as a person. So I think it can be really useful. But to your point about the invasiveness, I think having open dialogue around that in advance, like what would make you feel comfortable? And to Jennifer's point about trauma, and I know we've had previous ed breaks on intergenerational trauma and cultural trauma and, all different kinds of areas. I really think, I really value this idea of asking, like asking in advance, asking in plain language, what would be good for you? How would you like me to respond? What would feel right? Because some people want to be responded to in a very particular way, and other people might feel completely differently. And as an educator, especially if you're with a lot of different students at once, having a little bit of an idea about that and creating a space where people can talk about what might be, a way they want to be responded to, or having some agreements around how we're going to respond to each other out in the open, I think could only be helpful, especially in the virtual environment.
Thanks, Dr. Lynn. That's very nice. I like that.
There's also another question here.
Mhm.
It is always possible to offer options for how students want to share their experiences, and if they want to share and how much they want to share. Requiring sharing can definitely be invasive. Yes, ask.
Mhm.
What do you say? Well, I think the way I've attended a lot of online classes, so I don't know, at some point at graduate level and or up, it doesn't bother us how about answering these questions. Like we just go into asking those, or go into talking about things here and there. During one of our classes, during the COVID section initially, so we were talking about, how COVID hit everybody hardly. When I came in class, I explained to everybody that, hey, I got COVID, and but not everybody actually, to your point, we are willing to share information regarding health issues or their natural living settings, if they are comfortable where they are living. So I agree with you. It's not everybody that probably needs to do that, but I don't think teachers force anybody to say what they want to say. It's an open statement. They probably, like Gillenwater, Dr. Gillenwater, start to talk about whatever it is that happened with himself. I was, maybe because of if we miss one class, the next day he tell us exactly why he was missing the class. The keys or whatever it is. But those discussions are most times open discussions. It's not meant to force anybody to say what you probably want to say. But definitely, most people are not willing to share their views, and they are not forced to do so.
We have a hand raised. Betty, I'm going to go ahead and allow you to talk. If you'd like to unmute.
I would like to elaborate on students' feelings for teachers. Many students feel that the teacher does not like them by their facial expressions. Also, I feel that a student learns better and raises their hand if you say to them, although I am your teacher, I do not know everything. And in dealing with different cultures, children learn in different ways. So as a teacher, you need to find out just what the student needs in order to learn. And there are so many objectives to teaching. And if a teacher finds out what the student actually knows and does not know, it makes for a consistent and objective classroom because of how they accomplish their goals in society.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. It's interesting. Yeah. Any other thoughts on that?
Dr. Gillenwater, I think in the chat,
Yeah.
Valerie makes a great point about how different cultures might view disabilities different.
Oh, yeah.
So
Yeah.
even, finding out about that, and again, asking just seems to keep coming up.
Yeah. No, I agree. Yeah, and yeah, well, one thing that I try, Stephen mentioned, and I think I've shared this with friends and colleagues before, is early on, I used to be very hesitant to share, like be vulnerable, I guess, like, open up about myself and where I'm coming from and what's going on. I kind of was afraid that, that might be like an issue of respect, right? Well, you're supposed to be Dr. Gillenwater, you're the expert and da da da, and like I believe was just mentioned, like, you can't be the expert in everything. You don't know everything that everybody knows. That's not possible.
Sure.
And so I try, as I've grown in my work and tried to open up a bit more, I have found that helps. And that allows, I feel like for me personally, I can't speak for anybody else, but for me personally, that helps me to be able to ask questions actually. And not seem, or hopefully not seem invasive or, things like that. But yeah, disabilities, that's a good point though. I might have students who have needs, right? And I used to be hesitant to, if they didn't fill out their paperwork or whatever, I used to be a little nervous and think, should I email them to remind them? I feel a little like, a little awkward about that. But now, like, I feel like I get to know my students so well. I know what's going on. I know what their needs are, and I try and help them to connect with whomever can do that. But sometimes you can't, I'm rambling a bit, but you can't really, it's most disabilities I feel like are not readily evident, like, so you do need to ask. But yeah, so how maybe that's a good point to finish this question on, is like, when it comes to that, like, how do you ask? What are people's thoughts on that? Like, how do you get to know that part? What if they're guarded? Yeah,
You want me to
we'll
read
come
it?
back to that point. Yeah, do you mind reading the one from Jennifer, I think? And then we'll
No,
go back to
okay.
Dr. Halls.
Yeah. Often because students have had previous bad experiences in schools, they and their families come into learning with a great deal of distrust. It can take time to build trust. When distrust has also been developed, repair can happen, though, if you are patient and sincere and authentic and realize the difficult conversations in the classrooms often are not about you, but came from a different context. And if you can to detach the compassion, often you can repair and build a new trust relationship as an instructor.
And then Dr. Hall had mentioned previously, there is a power dynamic in a classroom, and that's what that comment's elaborating on. The students can
Yeah.
easily assume, if the instructor asks students to share something about the students' identities or cultures, then the student should share something because of the authority of the instructor. So that first comment you read is kind of about establishing that trust, the relationship, right? And there might be a distrust there. And then there is a power dynamic. I mean, I've been told by many students when we first meet, I'm intimidated. I'm intimidated by the program. And even I've had students say, I'm intimidated by you, and so that's, and I get that. I mean, I get that. I see that. I understand. So anyway, just throwing that out there.
And also, I think it's about building a relationship with the students. So there was something I came across with a principal from Canada, Dr. Marion Duke. She was talking about 2x10 theory to intentionally build relationship with your students. So the 2x10 theory was pioneered by him, but he felt that teachers could spend 2 minutes a day for 10 days trying to connect with challenging students. In the classroom, most times you must have some students that are challenging. So you find ways and means to get through those students. But even if the student exerts no desire to connect, a teacher can subtly plan quality time with that student and show that they care. They may ask questions about their families before class, getting their feedback on activities, soliciting their help with setup or reminders, and checking in with them during work. I mean, etc. Those things. There's a school in Utah that actually, the Ogden High School, used that 2x10 relationship building to increase student sense of belongingness to one another. I just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah, I've heard of that also, Stephen, from a teacher when I worked in K-12, who had come across probably the same information you had. And she said, I've tried everything. This student is just not connecting with me. I'm going to try this. And she documented it and kept track of it. And she really did feel at the end like it made a difference. It held her accountable, like knowing that she was keeping track of that and had like a number, like just held her accountable to doing it. So I love that you pointed out that strategy. That's a great one, Stephen. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I see the last comment talking about film is a really good icebreaker. Well, that's something that the participant and I do quite often. Actually, we talk about movies and television. Yeah. I've given Eric a list of episodes of Clone Wars to watch, so he can catch up on Bad Batch. So, I mean, I'm a geek, so, you know, not to label me, but I love like that kind of stuff. So, you know, that's I mean, popular culture is a pretty strong way to connect with people, actually. So it's, you know, it's lots of people love Marvel movies, you know, that kind of thing. So, but those are fun things to discuss and talk about too. Well, we're running a little low on time, so I wanted to get to the next. Thanks, Eric. I wanted to get to the next comment or discussion prompt here. There we go. So, Stephen, let's see. Do you want to read that one?
Yes. So when teaching online or virtually, how would you make your course or lecture materials inclusive?
Any thoughts on that?
So I think to jumpstart on that, we probably might have to examine the teaching materials. You know, which voice are we speaking in the classroom? I mean, whose story do you tell? Represent a wide range of voices when we talk in the classroom, because the classroom we know is diverse and we have every culture possibly that we are addressing. So when we make examples and when we bring out teaching materials, we probably have to diversify those also. You know, that probably can address some of the iniquities. People will feel that they belong, respected, or part of whatever you are teaching.
I was just thinking, you know, when developing courses and even just looking for stuff to help students, or, you know, writing a paper myself or something, I'll admit, like, I just go to the library and, you know, I do the research. I look for articles and I read the abstracts and I take the article and I think, okay, you know, this is information I don't know, this is information I need, or maybe I can expand on this or make connections or whatever. But I never think like I might have a list of all white guys, you know, like I don't even, it doesn't even really dawn on me. So I think that's a good point. You know, looking, you know, you get caught up in looking for the information and perhaps don't consider like what point of view that information is coming from. You hope it's coming from a scientific point of view, obviously, but which should be objective, I guess. But anyway, just rambling my thoughts on that.
So you have your hand raised. Did you have a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to say choosing diverse materials is really important, but I look at the word lectures and something tells me that we haven't moved past the whole talking at our students. Instead, considering the idea that most learning occurs through dialogue. And if the materials are diverse and inclusive, and we're teaching our kids how to use their own brains, their own backgrounds, their own persons, their cultures, their communities, their parents, whatever, using themselves to critically think about whatever information we're putting in front of them, teaching them how to think for themselves and critically think for themselves and evaluate rather than telling them what to think. We provide a variety and a diversity of information that's out there, and then we say, let's dialogue. And even online you can do it. Let's just talk. What are your thoughts? How are you thinking about these things? And where is it coming from, these thoughts? And give them, empower them to use their own personal experience and thoughts and brain schemas and whatnot to work through the material we're presenting. Anyway, just a thought.
Great thought.
Sure.
Thanks.
Yeah. And I also think that it's nice to recognize the gender disparity that you probably might see. You wouldn't, online is hard to like identify, what gender someone identified with. So recognizing those gender disparities, LGBTQ folks, it can help for students to immerse themselves into the teaching moment, as opposed to like going one way, thinking about your own, where you come from and what you think is the mainstream.
So I think we're coming close here at time. So I don't know if we have time for this last discussion prompt or not, but I thought I'd at least put it up there. How can a student's prior knowledge be activated in a classroom? I believe it was Jennifer just kind of was definitely talking about that. Consider specific subjects such as math or history. Okay, so, I think math is, I'm not a math teacher by, by trade. So I always thought, man, how do you make math? I take the traditional math as objective, but I know it's not. I know there's word problem there, but anyway, yeah, so I think these are interesting. Histories, obviously can be contentious as you look at some of the curriculums in America, for example, and the changes, for example, that have happened in Texas curriculum, history curriculum and stuff. So just the final question here. I appreciate everybody's input too. Thank you so much. I've learned a lot.
We are almost at time. So if there are any final questions, probably have time for one or two. If not, Stephen and Dr. Gillenwater, are you able to share your contact information in case people would like to reach out to you?
Yeah, for sure, of course. I'll put it. Is it okay to put it in the chat?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And Dr. Lynn, did you want to talk a little bit about VESC and other opportunities through that?
I do see Betty Harper's hand is up. I don't know if we haven't. Do you have a 30-second comment, Betty, that you wanted to make before we close down? Okay, maybe that is just an error having that up. I thought it just went up. So I am going to post in the chat a link to register for VESC's first free virtual micro conference on October 7th. And both Stephen, who may be Dr. Jusu by then, I'm not sure. I think that could be happening, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so we would have Dr. Gillenwater and Dr. Jusu both there as panelists, along with all of our other VESC presenters as panelists and 4 expert speakers as well. And we're just so excited to have people come back and have some more dialogue and discussion. have all of these points kind of brought together in one conference. So I hope people will attend. Thank you so much, Stephen. It was wonderful. And thank you so much, Dr. Gillenwater. I really appreciate having you here.
No, thank you for having us. It was nice. It was fun.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone. The recording will be available in about 24 hours.